She is without sight, Kwame declared, his tone heavy, thick with ill-concealed impatience and a desperation that clawed at him. He gestured vaguely with one hand, as if the very air around Nia was a burden he had borne for too long. And I am in desperate need of these funds. Truly, desperately. Jabari leaned back in his chair, a dark, unsettling smile curving his lips, eyes gleaming with a predatory interest that sent a subtle chill through the air, though Kwame seemed not to notice or care. So, he drawled, the sound smooth and almost silken, you are willing to yield your niece to me for 20 million? For such a sum, you would relinquish guardianship and responsibility for her. Yes, Jabari, Kwame affirmed quickly, his voice tight, strained with the urgency of his financial woes. I have attempted everything on her behalf for years. Since my sibling departed this life unexpectedly and entrusted her to my care, I have borne the sole responsibility for her upkeep and well-being. It has been a prolonged and arduous duty, a considerable burden. Now it is her turn to compensate me, to provide some return for my efforts and the considerable expenses I have incurred over the years. Agreed, Jabari responded, the words sharp, decisive, his voice almost too eager, betraying the depth of his satisfaction with the arrangement. We have a pact then, a mutually beneficial understanding. Just one more condition, Jabari, Kwame added, lowering his tone slightly, a flicker of something akin to apprehension or perhaps just a desire for appearances passing over his face. You must wed her. Or, arrange it as you see fit, a proper, public arrangement, so people do not question her presence with you. It must appear legitimate to the outside world. She remains family, after all, and appearances must be maintained to avoid scandal or difficult questions. Settled. Jabari affirmed without hesitation, his voice smooth, his gaze unwavering, as if he had anticipated this very condition, had perhaps even desired it for reasons yet unspoken. The bargain was sealed, a life traded for coin and convenience in the hushed tension between the two men. Nia sat at the aged musical instrument situated in the corner of the courtyard. It was a simple upright piano, its wood faded and perhaps slightly warped by the elements, bearing the marks of time and neglect, but to Nia, it was a treasure, a link to a world she could no longer perceive visually. Her fingers, long and slender, began to glide instinctively over the keys in a soft, delicate air, coaxing forth a melody that seemed woven from memory and sorrow. It was a soothing tune, one her mother used to hum softly as she rocked Nia during her childhood, in a time that now felt like a distant, fragmented dream, before tragedy had struck with such devastating force, stealing everything. She played it now, the familiar notes a balm and a wound simultaneously, her heart weighted with an invisible burden of loss and loneliness, her fingers trembling slightly as the poignant sound filled the quiet area near the dwelling. The music served as her sole comfort in a harsh world, her sanctuary from the ever-present darkness, a shield against the relentless shadow that was her blindness. Her existence was a solitary one, marked by unseen struggles and the profound, often heavy, silence of a young woman who had never known the simple, vivid beauty of vision, who navigated her reality by touch, sound, and the fragile echoes of memory. Nia's inability to see was not a lifelong condition, not something she was born into, a natural part of her being. No, it was the direct, brutal consequence of the blaze that had raged years ago. A fire that had not merely consumed wood and possessions, but had devoured everything she had ever known, everything that felt safe and familiar, her entire world reduced to ashes and smoke. It was that inferno that had fractured her kinship ties beyond repair, snatching away her beloved progenitors in a single, terrifying night of heat and terror, and casting her abruptly into a realm of profound darkness, both literally in the sudden, total loss of her sight, and figuratively in the shattering of her world and her innocence. The vivid, searing recollections of that night haunted her dreams and echoed in the quiet moments of her waking hours, a constant reminder of the trauma. Yet, paradoxically, it was the blaze that also granted her a peculiar, painful form of clarity. Her blindness served as a stark, undeniable reminder of all that had been irrevocably lost, stripping away the illusions of permanence and safety. After the fire, Nia was left with nothing but the fragmented, painful remnants of her past and the pervasive, lingering quiet of her lack of sight, a silence that felt as heavy as the darkness itself. Her uncle, Kwame, her father's sibling, had taken her in following her parents' demise, fulfilling a familial obligation that felt more like a duty than an act of love. But even within his dwelling, spacious though it might be compared to what she had known, she often felt like an outsider, an unwelcome guest who had been imposed upon the household. Residing with Uncle Kwame and his family was not simple, not a haven of comfort or acceptance. His spouse, Ajoa, a woman whose presence felt perpetually sharp and critical, had never been pleased about Nia moving into their home. From the instant she entered their residence, a shadow seemed to fall, and it was abundantly clear that Ajoa would never truly embrace her as part of the family, viewing her instead as an imposition, a burden to be tolerated. "You could have simply taken her to an institution for orphans," Ajoa had remarked one day when Kwame made the decision to bring Nia home, her voice sharp, laced with palpable vexation and resentment, utterly devoid of warmth or compassion for the grieving child. She spoke as if Nia were an inconvenient package, not a human being. "Why introduce such a burden here, into our lives, our home? She is nothing but extra work and expense." But Kwame had insisted, perhaps out of a sense of duty, perhaps a flicker of genuine care he still held for his deceased brother's child. "She is kin. My brother's daughter. She is residing with us now. This is her place." Despite this declaration, Nia never genuinely felt she belonged, the words feeling hollow against the reality of her daily treatment. Kofi, her uncle's offspring, a boy whose voice often dripped with malice and mockery, compounded her difficulties with relentless cruelty. He was cruel, finding perverse joy in devising novel ways to torment her, his youthful energy channeled into causing her physical pain and humiliation. He would stealthily conceal her aid stick, the tool she relied on implicitly for navigating the world safely, compelling her to stumble blindly into furnishings or walls, collisions that often left her bruised, scraped, and disoriented. He would then erupt in harsh, mocking laughter with his companions as she struggled to orient herself within the dwelling, a lost and vulnerable figure in their eyes, an object of amusement. It felt as though they all, Ajoa, Kofi, and even sometimes Kwame through his inaction, viewed her as less than human, as if her blindness somehow rendered her invisible to their empathy, stripping away her personhood and reducing her to an object of ridicule and utility. As the days progressed within Uncle Kwame's home, Nia's world seemed to shrink further, becoming increasingly confined, isolating, and lonely. The musical instrument, the sole place she found moments of tranquility and escape from the harsh realities of her life, became her refuge, her only true companion and confidant. She poured all her raw, unexpressed emotions into it, the profound sadness of her loss, the gnawing frustration of her limitations, the crushing isolation of being unwanted. Her music became her voice, narrating a tale of silent suffering and hidden resilience that no one else could perceive or understand. Even though Nia was sightless, that did not exempt her from the heavy burden of domestic duties. In fact, it seemed to make Ajoa even more determined to make her labor more intensely, as if to punish her for her very existence and condition, for the perceived burden she represented. She was taught to perform everything imaginable, from cleansing soiled floors on her hands and knees, scrubbing away grime she couldn't see, to washing culinary ware, her fingers navigating slippery surfaces with practiced caution, and even journeying out to the cultivated land to assist with gathering crops, a perilous task requiring navigation of uneven ground and sharp tools, despite her profound condition. Each time she stumbled, each time she faltered under the weight or missed something she couldn't detect, Ajoa's harsh, cutting remarks would echo in her mind, a constant, cruel reminder. You must compensate for the sustenance you consume and the shelter overhead. You are not a guest. You are a burden who must earn her keep. It did not matter that she could not see. In fact, her inability to see seemed only to make her even more overlooked, more invisible in the family's perception, her struggles dismissed as mere inconvenience or feigned helplessness. Nia had no companions, no true friends to share her burdens or offer comfort. The children at the learning place, those she occasionally encountered outside the confines of the home, did not wish to associate with her, their young minds unable or unwilling to look past her differences and her disheveled appearance.
How could they?
She was the sightless girl in tattered attire, clothes that were always hand-me-downs, patched and faded, revealing her poverty and misfortune, and a smile that lacked their carefree radiance, a smile often tinged with sadness she couldn't hide, a reflection of her lived experience. The sole solace she possessed, the one tangible source of comfort, was the musical instrument her uncle had acquired for her 16th-year celebration, a rare gesture of kindness in a difficult life, perhaps a moment of guilt or genuine affection. To most, it was merely an aged apparatus, a bit out of tune, perhaps, and certainly showing signs of wear, but to Nia, it was her sole comrade, her only means of evasion from life's harsh realities, a portal to a world where her blindness didn't matter, where only the notes counted, where she could express herself freely. It had been tucked away in a secluded spot in the courtyard by Ajoa, who perpetually seemed to consider it a disruption, an unwanted noise polluting her peace. "Why introduce such cacophony into this dwelling?" she had asked sharply when her husband obtained it, viewing it as a frivolous waste. But Kwame, who genuinely did possess a flicker of care for his niece amidst his self-interest, insisted it would be a present for Nia to cherish, something that brought her joy, and that was its sole function, its only justification to him. It was an item of reassurance, a quiet comfort, though it had to be concealed in the courtyard, distant from the main residence, pushed to the fringes like Nia herself. The world encircling her within the walls of the home was filled with unending tasks, cutting scorn, and lingering bitterness. Her uncle, Master Kwame, in his own way, did treat her akin to his own offspring in principle, providing shelter and food, fulfilling a basic duty, but even he, perhaps through weakness, preoccupation, or indifference, could not shield her entirely from the daily, petty cruelty of Ajoa and Kofi. They did not possess much in terms of material wealth, not compared to others in their village or the world Jabari inhabited, but in her uncle's view, she remained family, a tie that seemed to matter to him, at least in theory, distinguishing her status from that of a mere servant. It was not a great deal, certainly not a life of luxury or ease, but within the confines of that dwelling, Nia felt something she had never experienced before in her existence, a sense of connection, a fragile thread of belonging that tethered her, however tenuously, to another human being, a link to her past. Even if the dwelling brimmed with constant strain and unspoken resentments, even if the tasks demanded of her were unending and arduous, Kwame was the closest figure she had to a paternal presence now, the one link to the world she had lost, the only adult who had shown her any sustained kindness. But Nia differed visibly from the rest of them in her appearance and circumstances. She was the most deprived, the one who wore worn, inherited attire that barely clung to her delicate frame, clothes that had seen countless seasons and belonged originally to cousins she'd never met, passed down until they were threadbare. Clothing that appeared nearly like shreds, thin and threadbare, the patterns long since faded. The threads had long lost their hue, bleached by sun and washed thin, and the material was torn in places, despite Ajoa's grudging attempts at patching, making her appearance a constant reminder of her dependency and poverty. But Nia never voiced discontent, never complained aloud about her lot. She was appreciative, profoundly so, thankful for everything she possessed, even if it was meager by any standard. At least she had a shelter above her head, a roof against the rain and sun. At least she had sustenance to consume, even if she had to labor tirelessly for every single morsel, earning her keep with aching muscles and unseen bruises, the price of her survival. And at least she had the musical instrument, her private world, her sanctuary, even if it was confined to the quiet corner in the courtyard, only her touch able to grasp and release its hidden loveliness. Daily she lived in thankfulness for these minor gifts, these small mercies, clinging to them tightly, even as the world around her seemed intent on stripping her of everything else: her past, her sight, her sense of self-worth, her autonomy. That dusk, as Uncle Kwame reached the dwelling, the air seemed charged with an unusual energy, a furtive excitement. He swiftly seized Ajoa by the arm, his grip tight with excitement, and hurried her downstairs towards the relative privacy of the courtyard, eager to share his news. "We are wealthy, Ajoa," he murmured eagerly, his voice barely controlled, his face aglow with a feverish fervor, utterly oblivious that Nia had been seated by her piano in the courtyard long before they emerged from the house, a silent, unseen presence in the gathering gloom.
"How?"
Ajoa uttered, her voice sharp, laced with palpable bewilderment and a touch of suspicion. "I do not comprehend, Kwame. What schemes have you concocted now to suddenly acquire wealth? We are now 20 million more affluent," Kwame declared, his voice rising with triumph, his eyes gleaming with the cold light of avarice, seeing only numbers, not consequences. "I finally made the decision to transfer Nia to the affluent gentleman I mentioned to you previously, the one who expressed interest." Ajoa paused, her eyes blinking rapidly as she attempted to absorb his astonishing words, her initial confusion warring with the dawning realization of the vast sum mentioned.
"What?
"Transfer her? To a man? But, Kwame," she stammered, her voice tinged with genuine surprise, the idea seeming preposterous. She's sightless. She's a burden. She has nothing to offer. How could that man possibly desire her for himself, let alone pay such a price?" Kwame sought to calm her, waving a dismissive hand, a broad, self-satisfied smirk spreading across his face. "I do not know, and frankly, I am unconcerned with his reasons. That is his affair entirely. I am merely so content with the funds, the sheer magnitude of the money, that I forgot to even inquire about his motives. It doesn't matter why. We are established now. Our future is secure. We will never have to worry about money again." Ajoa's countenance, which had been clouded with doubt, erupted in a wide, rapacious grin, her eyes narrowing with naked covetousness as the reality of the sum settled upon her, eclipsing any other consideration. "Marvelous! Oh, Kwame, this is splendid. Truly splendid. My apprehension was foolish. But still, what does your acquaintance seek with a girl who cannot see? It makes no rational sense." "Unknown. And frankly, still unconcerned," Master Kwame responded, his voice charged with unrestrained elation, deaf to any moral implications or the bizarre nature of the deal. "All I know is we receive 20 million. That is solely what signifies presently. That is the only reality that matters, the only thing worth considering." 'Twas then Nia, who had been seated quietly by her piano, her fingers stilled on the keys, her body frozen in place, overheard their entire exchange. Her heart lurched violently in her chest, a sickening, painful jolt that stole her breath. Her breath hitched, catching painfully in her throat, a strangled sound she managed to suppress. She could not believe the words she was hearing, the callousness, the blatant transaction, the casual discussion of her as property. Tears gathered hot and swift in her eyes, blurring the darkness before them with a different kind of shadow. And for a fleeting moment, she felt the overwhelming urge to shriek, to cry out, to reveal her presence and confront them, to shatter their callous joy. But she remained still, frozen in place by shock and fear, her emotions surging violently internally, a maelstrom of pain and betrayal, as she tried desperately to process the horrifying discourse she had just overheard. She was being bartered, traded like some inanimate article of value, a piece of property to be exchanged for wealth and convenience. The man she had confided in, the solitary one who had ever exhibited even a flicker of benevolence and protection towards her, who had represented her only remaining familial bond, was now openly brokering over her very existence as if she were nothing more than property, an asset to be liquidated for profit. As she sat there quivering, a small, unseen figure in the courtyard shadows, Master Kwame persisted in his excited revelations to Ajoa, planning their future with a sudden windfall. Jabari will wed her, he continued, confirming the condition Jabari had stated, emphasizing the necessity for legitimacy. He will arrange a nuptial event or whatever ceremony he desires. It matters none to me how he does it, as long as it's done publicly to satisfy appearances, he explained nonchalantly, speaking of his niece's fate as if discussing someone else's existence entirely, someone unconnected to him by blood or bond, someone whose feelings were irrelevant. "Oh, my goodness," Ajoa remarked, a knowing, pleased smirk emerging across her countenance, her earlier bewilderment completely gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated satisfaction and greed. She actually gained more than warranted from this situation, didn't she? A wealthy husband, while we simply benefited from having a temporary burden removed and gained 20 million. It is a remarkably favorable arrangement for us all, Kwame. More than I could have ever hoped for her, or for us. Nia's spirit fractured at that instant, shattering into countless pieces within her chest, beyond repair. The casual cruelty, the absolute lack of concern for her feelings or her future, the blatant joy over the monetary gain, the description of her as a burden, it was too much to bear. She understood then, with a painful clarity that cut deeper than any physical wound, the true nature of her relationship with them. She had been naught but a burden to them from the start, someone exchangeable for coin, an asset to be leveraged. And now, even the very man who had taken her in as a child, who had represented her only remaining kin, her sole link to family, was willing to yield her for the sake of riches, to trade her life for comfort and security for himself and Ajoa. She sat in silence, her hands trembling in her lap, the physical manifestation of her internal turmoil, as she listened to the designs being laid out for her path ahead, a future over which she had absolutely no input, no say, no control whatsoever. Her entire existence, since the fire had stolen her sight and her family, had been spent in obscurity, living on the fringes of others' lives, relying on them even for the most trivial of daily tasks, for navigation, for provision, for a sense of place. But now, in this moment of chilling clarity, she grasped just how truly insignificant she was to those around her, how little her feelings or wishes mattered in the grand scheme of their desires. To them, she was merely a sightless female, a girl whose only value lay in the price she could fetch, a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. Hot, silent tears traced agonizing lines down her face in the darkness of the courtyard as she tried desperately to contain the torrent of feelings threatening to overwhelm her, the pain of betrayal, the fear of the unknown, the profound sense of worthlessness, the crushing weight of her helplessness. She wanted desperately to cry out, to yell, to scream, to flee from the horrifying reality that was closing in on her, to disappear entirely, but she remained motionless, frozen in place by shock and fear, fearing the repercussions, the anger, the further cruelty, if she exposed having heard everything, if she dared to disrupt their plans. The crushing load of this new, bleak reality weighed heavily on her slender shoulders, a physical burden added to her emotional pain, and the quiet of the courtyard, usually a solace, now felt like a harsh, stifling recall of how meager the authority she had over her own being truly was, a constant reminder of her powerlessness. Following dawn, the air still cool and carrying the scent of damp earth and morning dew, Nia was seated by the musical instrument, her fingers absently traversing the keys, coaxing hesitant, mournful notes from the aged piano, a quiet elegy for her lost life. Uncle Kwame entered the courtyard, his footsteps heavy, and she sensed his presence immediately, a shift in the air, though she couldn't see the grave expression he wore, an unusual solemnity for him. He stood near her, his presence causing an internal disquiet that tightened her muscles, a knot forming in her stomach. "Nia," he commenced, his voice softer than usual, almost solicitous, attempting a gentle approach, though still carrying that underlying commanding tone he often used when he expected compliance. "I have something important to impart to you. There is an affluent man, a gentleman of considerable means and status, who is keenly interested in marrying you." Nia froze instantly, her fingers halting mid-tune, silencing the melancholic melody abruptly. She had heard those phrases previously, pieced together from the hushed, furtive conversation in the courtyard. Sold to an affluent man. A pact formed in secrecy. But hearing it confirmed, spoken aloud from Uncle Kwame's lips, made it undeniably tangible, horrifyingly real, as if her existence had merely been reduced to a trade, a transaction finalized without her consent or knowledge until after the fact. "A wealthy man desires to wed me?" Nia inquired, her voice a mere whisper, quivering despite her attempt to inject fortitude into it, to sound calm. She already knew the answer, but hearing it again somehow made it worse, more concrete, more terrifying. "Indeed," Kwame affirmed, his voice regaining some of its usual brusqueness, eager to dispense with the difficult conversation and move on to the benefits. "His appellation is Jabari. You will marry him. It is advantageous for you, Nia. Exceedingly so. You will possess a future, a life of comfort and ease you could not have here, living in poverty and reliance." Nia was speechless, the implications of his words crushing her. All she could do was remain seated at the piano bench, the crushing burden of his statement pressing down on her chest, making it difficult to breathe, to think. Her mind was not a blank, but a storm of bewildering questions, raw pain, and a dawning sense of irreversible finality. She was being given away. Ajoa entered the courtyard shortly after, her footsteps brisk and self-important, appearing utterly self-satisfied, a wide, unpleasant smirk spreading across her countenance, a predator gloating over her praise perceived good fortune, while knowing the true cost. "You are exceedingly fortunate, Nia," she stated, her voice sharp, laced with a triumphant malice, utterly devoid of warmth or genuine kindness, relishing this moment. "Do you realize how many females would covet such an opening as this? A wealthy, powerful man like Jabari could choose anyone, any beautiful girl in the land, any woman he desired, yet he selected you. You ought to be profoundly appreciative of your good fortune, your unexpected rise." Nia oriented her face towards the sound of Ajoa's voice, seeking to grasp not just the words, but the meaning behind them, the subtle cruelty she could sense radiating from the woman. "Appreciative," she echoed softly, her voice remote, distant, struggling to comprehend the twisted logic. The idea that being sold was a blessing. "Oh, cease the theatrics, my dear," Ajoa countered, a derisive, impatient note entering her voice, as if Nia's quiet reaction was a performance designed to elicit sympathy she did not deserve. "This is your prospect, Nia. Your only chance to have a life, a comfortable existence away from here. The man has alternatives, dozens of beautiful, attractive females throwing themselves at him, eager for his attention and wealth. Females who are not lacking sight, who are whole and perfect, but he has selected you, a blind girl, from obscurity. You should deem yourself blessed, truly favored by fate, instead of sitting there moping like a lost child." Nia felt the sharp prick of her comments, the cruel truth of them hitting their mark, but her gaze stayed vacant, unfocused. She knew not how to feel anymore. Her emotions were a tangled mess of pain, fear, and confusion. Was this genuinely her prospect, her miraculous chance at a better life, as Ajoa claimed, or was it just another means for those around her to gain at her detriment, using her as a pawn, a commodity? Subsequent hours that day, a parcel reached the dwelling, carried by a messenger Nia could hear but not see, his presence announced by the rustle of fabric and the clearing of a throat. It was from Jabari, the man who had effectively acquired her existence, whose wealth had purchased her life and future. Nia's heart plummeted in her chest, a cold dread settling there, as she overheard Uncle Kwame's jubilant shout from another chamber, followed by Ajoa's equally excited cries. She knew its nature before she even felt it, a token, a preliminary gesture, something intended to ready her for the impending events, a symbol of the transaction that had taken place. Uncle Kwame entered the chamber where she sat, gripping a large, flat box carefully. He approached her, his excitement palpable, a broad smile evident in the energy radiating from him, oblivious to her inner turmoil. "Behold, Nia," he announced, his voice beaming with satisfaction, holding the box out to her. "It is for you. Jabari sent you something pleasant, something special, a bespoke gown for your nuptials. A wedding dress." He placed the container before her, and Nia slowly unsealed it, her hands quivering slightly with a mixture of apprehension and reluctant curiosity. Within lay a stunning rosy bespoke gown, its fabric silken and smooth to the touch, cool against her skin, its very material seeming to whisper of luxury and expense. Though she couldn't see its color or form, she could feel its exquisite craftsmanship, the delicate stitching, the weight of the opulent textile that shimmered, Kwame told her, in the illumination. It was a garment that proclaimed opulence, wealth beyond anything she had previously encountered, much less imagined ever dawning. She could, in her mind's eye, guided by touch and description, envision how beautiful it would appear upon her, a brief, painful fantasy, even though she could not see it directly. But as she moved her fingers over the refined fabric, tracing the lines of the design, feeling the texture of the intricate details, a profound sorrow enveloped her, sharp and suffocating, pressing down on her chest. This was not a gown for her wedding ceremony in the traditional sense, a joyful celebration of love and union. This was raiment for her to enact the role of the bride in a cold, calculated deal, to be presented to Jabari as nothing more than wear, a valuable object encased in exquisite textile to make the transfer seem more palatable, more legitimate in the eyes of the world. She pondered inwardly as she stroked the soft substance, her heart heavy with the painful realization, if Jabari even perceived her as a person at all beyond the transaction. Did he see a female without sight, a human being with a past and feelings, with dreams and sorrows? Or did he simply hold some strange fantasy about having a non-seeing spouse, someone compliant, someone who would never challenge him, never discern his pretense or secrets, someone who would exist in his shadow? Nia swallowed the large, painful lump in her throat, the weight of her reality settling heavily upon her. She had no alternative, no means of escape. The agreement was finalized, sealed with money and conditions she had not agreed to. She was to wed Jabari, and her existence, it seemed, had been predetermined for her, mapped out by others, irrevocably. All she could do was contemplate, as her fingers continued to outline the gown's form, feeling its heavy, luxurious drape, what sort of life awaited her at its conclusion. Would it truly be a union, a partnership, or just another confinement? This time with distinct, gilded bonds, but bonds nonetheless, perhaps even stronger than the ones she sought to escape. The day of the union dawned with a pervasive sensation of unreality that Nia could not evade, no matter how hard she tried to ground herself in touch and sound, to find solid ground in the swirling chaos. It was a ceremony in which she had had little hand in organizing, certainly no input into the details or the guest list, yet she found herself swept into an environment she had never conceived existed, pulled into the vortex of a man who had purchased her life with sheer wealth and power. The grand vessel waiting on the waters, a magnificent yacht, surpassed anything she had ever witnessed, even in her mind's eye conjurings of luxury from overheard conversations. Refined, majestic, and undeniably opulent, it shone against the vast, sparkling expanse of water, its imposing shape akin to a buoyant stronghold, solid and untouchable, a fortress of wealth. Its upper levels were adorned with lovely pale blossoms, their petals glistening like pearls in the morning sunlight, filling the air with a delicate perfume, and delicate golden bands swayed gently in the breeze, catching the light and tinkling faintly, a sound of expensive adornment. The atmosphere carried the distinct scent of salt from the ocean mingling with the heavy, expensive aroma of perfume and flowers from the elaborate decorations, a heady fusion of nature and luxury that made everything feel like a surreal, almost dreamlike fantasy, detached from the ground, detached from reality. Affluent individuals, dressed in extravagant clothing, their voices carrying the lilt of privilege, mixed about on the decks, their laughter echoing, a cascade of carefree sound, as they savored sparkling wine from fine goblets, the clinking of crystal a constant backdrop to their conversations. Nia could discern their voices, their murmurs, the confident clicks and taps of fashionable footwear against the gleaming surface of the deck, the sounds of a world utterly foreign to her. She felt diminutive, trivial, and profoundly out of place in this ocean of riches and excess, a small, blind girl adrift in a sea of opulence. But she maintained her composure, standing tall despite the trembling in her knees, her face carefully serene. After all, she was a bride now, outwardly embodying the role, even if she completely lacked the sensation, the joy, the genuine connection of one. She stood at the ceremonial space beside Jabari, her hand slightly trembling as it rested lightly in his touch cool and impersonal. He was attractive, she could tell from his posture and the comments she overheard from others, his tailored attire perfectly fitted, exuding an aura of power and control, a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. But for Nia, he was merely an unknown male, a powerful force who had entered her existence like a tempest, seizing what scant autonomy she had left, the last vestige of control over her own fate. His countenance, as described by the officiant and others, was composed, restrained, his smile courteous but remote, revealing little of his true thoughts or feelings towards her. She couldn't help pondering inwardly, with a painful twist in her heart, if he even saw her as an individual, a woman with a history and feelings, with pain and resilience, or if she was simply an object for exhibition, something valuable to acquire and parade before his associates, a curiosity piece, a symbol of his ability to possess even the most unconventional treasures. The rite itself, a formal exchange of vows performed under the open sky on the elegant deck of the yacht, was magnificent in its presentation. A carefully staged spectacle for the wealthy attendees. The attendees were all smiles, nodding and murmuring their assent and congratulations, playing their part in the elaborate charade, witnessing the union of power and purchased vulnerability. The officiant spoke in a deep, solemn tone, his words noble and resonant, phrases about affection, dedication, and the sanctity of the marital connection floating over Nia like a mist of utter aloofness, completely detached from her reality, from the truth of the situation. She heard him speak of love, commitment, and the blending of two souls, of sickness and health, richer and poorer, but it all seemed so remote, so utterly alien to her lived experience. This was not a union of hearts, not a merging of lives based on mutual affection, but an accord for currency, a commercial exchange thinly veiled by tradition and ritual. It was not a bond founded on devotion or mutual respect, but on desperation and acquisition, a transaction of human worth for monetary gain. When the solemn promises came, the vows that bound their lives legally and publicly, Jabari spoke assuredly, his voice unwavering, clear and confident, a performance perfected through practice, devoid of genuine emotion, yet perfectly delivered. Nia couldn't distinguish the precise utterance he made, the exact words he pledged, but she knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in her bones, that they were rehearsed lines, empty words that meant nothing genuine to him, a necessary part of the show. He was already, she was certain, contemplating the financial aspect of things, about the $20 million disbursed, the cost versus the perceived value of his acquisition, the business side of this personal act. She, conversely, simply inclined her head when prompted, repeating the phrases as though on autopilot, the words flat and lifeless on her tongue, detached from any feeling. There was no fervor in her tone, no true sentiment, no hope or joy, only a quiet resignation. She was uttering things out of necessity, performing her part in the bargain, the required actions of a bride. This was her current state, an automaton bride in a gilded cage floating on water, her life orchestrated by others. The instant they were formally united, the officiant pronouncing them husband and wife, the finality of it settling upon her, Nia felt a strange, profound void consume her, a hollowness in the very core of her being. Somewhere, deep down, perhaps foolishly, She had perhaps hoped for something greater, something more authentic to emerge from the day, a glimmer of humanity. But now, as the attendees applauded and cheered, the celebratory sounds echoing around her, meaningless noise in the face of her emptiness, her mind was far from the shallow festivity. She couldn't help pondering what her future held with this man, this stranger to whom she was now bound by law and money. Was she truly a spouse in his perception, someone deserving of respect and partnership, someone he might eventually see as a person, or was she just another acquisition, another valuable item added to his collection, a possession among many? Following the rite, the festivity carried on upon the grand vessel, the affluent guests dancing and reveling, their laughter resounding across the levels of the yacht, a distant, meaningless noise to her ears, a world she was in but not truly a part of. Nia couldn't concentrate on the sounds of the party, though, on the music or the conversations. She existed in her own sphere, a world of internal turmoil and quiet dread, her thoughts wandering relentlessly to what awaited back at Jabari's dwelling, to the life she was now yoked to, bound by vows she didn't believe in, to a man she didn't know, in a world she couldn't fully perceive. As darkness began to descend, casting long shadows and replacing the bright sunlight with a softer, deeper hue over the water, it was time for departure from the glittering spectacle of the yacht. Jabari, ever composed, ever courteous in his public persona, his hand a light but firm pressure on her arm, guided her gently from the deck, across the gangway to the landing point where an expensive, streamlined dark vehicle awaited. The vehicle gleamed under the dock lights, its paint flawlessly crafted, its chrome accents catching the light, its lines speaking of speed, power, and exclusivity, the type that effortlessly drew attention and spoke volumes about its owner's wealth and status. It was a stark, almost shocking contrast to her reality, to the worn paths and simple dwellings she had known, so utterly remote from the confined, small dwelling she had once shared with Uncle Kwame and his family, a life defined by scarcity. The portals opened silently, electronically, and she was softly ushered inside, the hides covering the seats yielding sumptuously beneath her weight, molding to her form a tactile sensation of overwhelming comfort. The interior carried the faint, rich aroma of costly fragrance and polished timber, a smell of contained luxury, an artificial perfection. The driver, a silent, unobtrusive figure clad in a dark suit, acknowledged Jabari with a brief nod before starting the engine, a low, powerful hum that vibrated through the seat, and they commenced their journey, smoothly pulling away from the landing point, leaving the grand vessel's luminous lights and the fading sounds of the party behind, leaving her old life behind. As the sleek conveyance traversed the tranquil arteries of the affluent district, the smooth roads speaking of careful maintenance and privilege, the quiet hum of the engine the only sound besides the distant fading city noise, Nia gazed, or rather oriented herself, towards a casement, her own visage barely discernible as a pale, indistinct shape in the glass's dark reflection. The outer world, glimpsed only through sound and the feel of movement, was a blur of passing shapes and distant sounds. Everything felt remote and profoundly unfamiliar, disconnected from her. It was as if she were not living this moment, but watching it unfold from a great distance, a silent, powerless observer in her own narrative, her life unfolding without her participation. She had absolutely no concept what to anticipate from Jabari, this man to whom she was now married, legally bound. She didn't entirely grasp his aims, his genuine sentiments, the reasons behind this strange, costly arrangement. Was he benevolent beneath his layers of affluence and composed demeanor? Was he someone she could ever confide in, ever hope to find a flicker of human warmth or kindness from? Or was she merely another prize to exhibit, a sightless spouse acquired to augment his hoard of indulgences, a unique possession to display to his world, a symbol of his ability to acquire anything he desired? The vehicle executed a sharp turn, and Nia's thoughts, which had been adrift in uncertainty, reverted sharply to the present moment, the physical shift grounding her abruptly in the inescapable reality. They were proceeding to the dwelling with Jabari now. This would be her existence from this day forward. The existence of a wife, yes, legally and publicly, but one that felt detached from her, one that did not truly belong to her, one she had not chosen. She was to be espoused to a man who viewed her perhaps as not more than an item for admiration, a valuable trophy for exhibition in his opulent world, a beautiful object to possess. As the streamlined dark vehicle rolled slowly and silently into the entrance path of Jabari's sprawling compound, the sound of the tires crunching on the gravel signaling their arrival, the gates closing behind them, Nia felt an odd, intense sense of acquiescence wash over her, heavy and undeniable, pressing her into the plush seat. Resistance felt futile, pointless. This was her life now, irrevocably altered, sealed by contract and ceremony. She had no agency in the matter, no control over the trajectory her existence had taken, no means to reroute her fate. She was to be wedded to a man she scarcely knew, bound to him by a contract disguised as marriage, purchased from her guardian. And in the quiet of the conveyance, the comfortable silence amplifying her internal turmoil as they approached the imposing facade of their new residence, a structure she could feel the size of rather than see, she couldn't help but ponder. With a deep sense of loss, if freedom would ever be found again, if she would ever truly be unbound. Would she ever possess a voice in her own narrative, the ability to choose her own path, to shape her own destiny? Or would this pattern persist, her future forever shaped by the actions and desires of others, by deals made in rooms she was not in? The vehicle ceased movement with a soft sigh of hydraulics, and Jabari opened the portal for her, his movements smooth and practiced. She stepped forth, her heart weighted with the accumulated sorrow and uncertainty of the day, the ground solid beneath her feet, and entered the dwelling that would now serve as her confine, the gilded cage where she would reside as a spouse, bound to a man whose true objectives, his inner world, she could not even begin to comprehend, a mystery she was now married to. Jabari guided Nia into the grand residence, the heavy door swinging open silently, each step leading her further into an environment that felt progressively strange, alien, and overwhelmingly opulent. The entrance hall was vast, the air cool and still, carrying faint echoes of their footsteps. The partitions were embellished with extravagant adornments, from heavy tapestries and intricate carvings to framed art she would never see, bordered by golden fringes, and suspended luminous fixtures from the upper surfaces cast a soft, expensive glow that she could feel the warmth of, but not see. The atmosphere carried the heavy, cloying scent of pricey fragrances, the kind that stung her nose with their excessive sweetness, a perfume of wealth itself, masking any natural smells. It was a dwelling that screamed prosperity from every corner, a monument to wealth and power, but to Nia, navigating it by memory and touch, it felt fundamentally chilly and detached, lacking any human warmth, any sense of home, as if she were merely an observer peering inward at a life that wasn't hers, a role she was playing. As they reached the ascent, the grand staircase, or perhaps a silent elevator carrying them upwards to the private quarters, Nia couldn't help perceiving the immense burden of her novel state, the weight of being Jabari's wife in this unfamiliar, overwhelming place. Everything in this dwelling seemed to radiate with an intensity, a presence of wealth and grandeur that pained her senses, though she couldn't see it directly. Yet simultaneously, a deep void settled within her breast, an emptiness where hope or joy might have been, a hollow echo of her lost life. This was her life now, an existence she had never sought, never desired, never chosen. She was a stranger in her own matrimonial bond, an interloper in her own story, married to a man she barely knew, in a place that felt utterly alien. They arrived at the chamber, a large, imposing space, and Jabari paused by the entrance, his hand resting on the fastener, a silent indication of his presence. He gave her a swift look. She could sense his attention, his gaze upon her, but his mien remained unreadable, a mask of polite detachment she couldn't penetrate. "Should you require aught, anything at all, inform me," he stated, his voice still remote, formal, almost clinical, as though she were merely another visitor being shown to her room, not his wife on their wedding night, not a person with feelings and needs beyond basic requirements. "Direct me to the washroom," Nia requested, her voice slightly quavering despite her best efforts, as if treading on fragile ground, unsure of every motion, every word, fearing she might make a mistake, reveal her vulnerability, break some unseen rule in this unfamiliar, intimidating space. There was something about the residence, its sheer scale and impersonal luxury, about Jabari's quietude and distance, that made her feel profoundly out of place, vulnerable and exposed. She felt like a delicate ceramic figure, placed precariously on a shelf in a vast, empty room. One misstep, and she might splinter into irreparable pieces, her fragile composure shattering. Without utterance, his face still unreadable, Jabari inclined his head, indicating he would guide her. He led her towards the bathing chamber, a vast, opulent space adjacent to the bedroom, the sound of her footsteps echoing slightly on the hard floor. The marble surfaces beneath her feet were cold and smooth, amplifying the sense of sterile grandeur, and though she couldn't see them, the vast reflective panels lining the partitions, as described by Ajoa when showing her the house once, made the area feel even grander, more impersonal, like a public bathhouse rather than a private sanctuary. The portal clicked shut behind her as Jabari ushered her in, his presence still looming just inside the door, quiet but undeniably there, not retreating as she expected. As he stepped back, creating a small distance, Nia inhaled deeply, feeling the tension in her body slightly diminish, a minuscule release of the day's strain, a moment of potential privacy. She expected him to depart, to withdraw from the chamber and leave her to the solitude she craved after the long, performative day. But what she was unaware of was that he was not leaving entirely. Jabari silently unsealed another door within the bathing chamber itself, one that led to a large bathing basin, a sunken tub the size of a small pool, recessed into the marble floor. It was as if he had anticipated her every action, even though she hadn't spoken her intentions beyond asking for the washroom, as if he knew her needs instinctively, or had planned for them. Nia failed to perceive this subtle movement, the quiet click of the inner door. She was already engrossed in something else, turning her attention inwards, seeking refuge in her own physical being. She turned towards the chamber's center, towards the perceived source of the water, and unfastened her gown, the heavy, costly material sliding off her body and descending to the surface in a soft, luxurious rustle around her feet, a sound of release. She stood thus, her naked skin exposed to the cool atmosphere of the grand room, vulnerable yet strangely empowered by the shedding of her role as bride. She felt a peculiar, profound sense of liberation as the garment gathered around her feet, a casting off of the day's performance, the bride persona she had been forced to inhabit. For a fleeting period, she was merely Nia, the girl who loved music, who found joy in touch and sound, no longer the sightless girl, no longer the female who had been traded, though wearing encased in silk. She was just herself, standing alone in the quiet chamber, uncertain of the next turn of events, but for this moment, free from external expectations. 'Twas then Jabari, who believed himself outside the chamber, merely waiting, his attention momentarily drawn, pivoted slightly, his eyes widening uncontrollably, frozen in place as he unexpectedly beheld her in her vulnerability, her unawareness, bathed in the soft, indirect light. Nia knew not. She had no way of knowing, but she had unknowingly transformed, in that instant, into something else entirely in his sight, a spectacle of unadulterated, breathtaking loveliness, a purity that stunned him. Her skin, flawless and seemingly untouched by life's rigors, the pain, the darkness she had endured, gleamed in the gentle illumination filtering into the room, appearing luminous. To Jabari, accustomed to calculated beauty, artifice, and the jaded world of wealth, it was as if he were viewing a divine being, someone untouched by the passage of time or the scars of grief, an unexpected vision of innocence. Nia didn't perceive his startled gaze, too engrossed in her own contemplation, lost in the quiet instant of physical freedom and relief, unaware of the profound influence she had just exerted upon him, the shift she had triggered. For a brief second, the world beyond the bathing chamber seemed to fade away entirely, leaving only the vision before him, the unexpected impact of her presence. She stood there in full magnificence, completely unaware that Jabari's breath had seized in his chest, held captive by the sight, his heart accelerating in a manner he hadn't anticipated, a reaction utterly foreign to his controlled existence, a jolt that shook his carefully constructed plan. Without a syllable, utterly incapable of speech or coherent action in that moment, overwhelmed by the unexpected tableau, Jabari slowly withdrew. Silently slipping out of the chamber and quietly closing the portal behind him, his movements automatic, driven by an instinct he didn't understand, a need to retreat and process. He couldn't bring himself to speak, to interrupt the unexpected vision, to act in any way that might shatter the strange spell that had momentarily fallen over him. He simply departed, the moment's weight pressing down on him, heavy and confusing, as he moved away from the door, his mind reeling from the tableau he had just witnessed, the stark, unguarded beauty that had momentarily stolen his breath and disturbed his carefully arranged world. Nia, still oblivious to his presence or departure, returned her attention fully to the bathing chamber, immersed in her own reality, her own internal world, finding solace in the tangible. She found the washing area, navigating by touch and the sounds of water, and entered the large bathing basin, the warm liquid pouring over her skin, instantly soothing the muscular strain that had built up over years of labor and tension, a physical release. She had no clue how her existence had taken this course, how everything had spun so far beyond her command, her control, landing her in this opulent, yet isolating, reality. All she could do was concentrate on the liquid, its comforting warmth enveloping her, the rhythmic sound of it splashing against her skin as she washed away the grime of the day, cleansing not just her body but perhaps, she hoped, some of the pain and sorrow from her soul. And outside the bathing chamber, in the quiet corridor, Jabari stood, his back against the cool partition, his mind teeming with thoughts he couldn't express, couldn't even fully form, thoughts that contradicted the clear objective of his bargain. The reality of his novel existence, of his union with Nia, had just altered in unforeseen, profound manners, shifting from a simple transaction to something he couldn't define. What was this sensation churning within him, this unexpected disturbance? What aspect of her, the girl he had purchased for 20 million, rendered everything so unfamiliar, so unsettling, so real? He had never anticipated this unexpected impact she had upon him, this sudden shift in his perception, this jolt to his emotional landscape. But now, as he stood in the corridor's quiet, the silence amplifying the confusion in his head, he realized he was commencing to question if an error was made, if this was truly what he desired when he made the deal, if the cost was merely monetary. But now it was past remedy. The pact was sealed, the marriage performed, their lives intertwined. For Nia, entering the bath, seeking comfort in the physical, it was merely another day, another task, a brief moment of physical comfort in a hard life. But for Jabari, standing outside that door, something was irrevocably, fundamentally different.